Welcome to Bedcrime Stories Podcast. I'm your host, T. If you like true crime without the drama and in a calm voice, you're in the right place. And let me just ask that after listening to or watching this video, if you find you enjoyed it or learned something, do me a favor, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment. And now, without further ado, let's dig in. Delphi defendant Richard Allen told law enforcement himself that he suffers from depression and anxiety. His wife, Kathy, told the authorities that her husband has anger issues. She also told them that his depression got worse after the crime. Kathy also told the cops about an incident in which her husband Richard placed a weapon in his mouth and threatened to unalive himself. Based on all of this, it's pretty clear that Richard Allen has mental health issues. Allen's defense team is saying that his 61 confessions to the crime that took the lives of teenagers Libby German and Abby Williams that he made to various people within the Indiana Department of Corrections are false confessions born out of his 13 months in solitary confinement, a period during which his mental health appeared to significantly decline. Some say this may have been a ploy to present himself as criminally insane. His defense team says no, this is down to the inhumane conditions in jail. We know that whoever committed this crime was undoubtedly a troubled individual. You don't nab two young girls, just 13 and 14, force them down a hill with the threat of a weapon, order them to remove their clothing, do God knows what else to them, and then use a sharp object to unalive them. It's one of the coldest and most cruel crimes that I have ever heard about. The wounds that Abby and Libby sustained seem to be the result of uncontrolled rage. We saw the same level of rage, perhaps even more rage, in the crime out of Moscow, Idaho, that left the 4 students deceased. Psychologists often associate perpetrators who use sharp-edged objects with potential mental health issues, a history of exposure to violence, impulsivity, and a desire for control, with the sharp object sometimes signifying a more personal and intimate form of aggression compared to other weapons. According to an article I read on the website of the National Library of Medicine, there is a significant association between schizophrenia/delusional disorder and the use of sharp objects as a method of unaliving someone. Using such an object ensures that the perpetrator can inflict the maximum amount of pain and suffering, as opposed to a quick unaliving. In these crimes, the perpetrator has a close proximity to the victim, and there are often multiple jabs. Libby German is a testament to this, along with 4 to 5 slices to her neck and throat that led to her death. There's evidence she was crying. Her tears mingled with the red stuff, dried in rivulets down her face. Whoever caused those injuries, whoever caused those tears, is a cold-hearted monster. Richard Allen's mental health history, along with those 61 confessions, as well as a confession to a jailhouse psychologist, make for a compelling case against him. Part of what I'm trying to say is that Richard Allen's troubling mental health fits the MO of the crime, and it is yet another piece of circumstantial evidence against him. The most damning of the confessions was to a clinical psychologist who examined Richard Allen while he was in custody at the Westville Correctional Facility. Dr. Monica Walla was employed as the lead psychologist for the Indiana Department of Correction. Now, Walla didn't initially discuss the Delphi case with Richard Allen. She actually discouraged him from talking about the case with others. But in an April 5th, 2023 patient complaint, Allen said to Walla, "I unalived Abby and Libby. I'm sorry." He then went on to say that he made sure they were deceased so that they didn't suffer, and he believed that they were deceased by the time he left the crime scene. According to Walla, he became tearful, and he said he committed the crime by himself. Allen said that his intentions were to essay the girls, and he alluded to having a, how shall I put this, addiction of sorts to sex. He also said he believed the girls were older, maybe 18 or 19, although he also thought they could have been as young as 11. Allen also said he was an alcoholic and that he had been both a victim and a perpetrator of child SA. Walla described him as having trouble staying on topic, and she noted that he didn't appear psychotic at the time. She believed he had, quote, situational psychosis, meaning he would have episodes of psychosis at times and then go into remission. Now, on May 3rd, Allen wanted to call his wife, and he recounted the events of February 13th, 2017, which is the day of the crime. He said he saw his mother in the morning in Mexico, Indiana. He was offered an invitation to go out to lunch, but he declined. He told Walla that he drank 3 beers and then went to the trails. I can't help but think of Ted Bundy, who sometimes drank before his crimes to gain confidence, to lower his inhibitions, to deal with his nerves. Yes, serialists apparently do get nervous. Allen told Walla that he saw Abby and Libby walking on the trail, and he followed them. He said he did something with his weapon, and that's when the cartridge fell out. He ordered the girls down the hill with the intent to essay them. He said that he saw something, and it seems like it was hard for the people in court to hear. It was either a man or a van, and this startled him. He then ordered the girls across the creek. This is when he gave them the wounds that they sustained, and he then covered their bodies with tree branches. Note that some of the things that Allen told Walla had not yet been made public. Thus, this piece of evidence is very powerful for the state. Now, according to the former warden of Westville Correctional Institute, John Gallipo, Allen's behavior in jail became more and more erratic after he began confessing in March of 2023. After confessing, Allen began washing his face in the toilet and, how shall I put it, pooping in his cell, sometimes smearing that on his face. Maybe he thought this was good for his skin and it was some sort of holistic mask. He also supposedly ate some of this, at least on one occasion. Maybe his canteen monies ran out. If you can't buy snacks, maybe you can make them for yourself. On March 5th of 2023, Allen told Warden Gallipo that he was ready to confess to unaliving Abby and Libby. Allen claimed that he had used a box cutter. Remember, that's what the expert forensic pathologist said in court was likely the weapon that caused the injuries, and then disposed of the box cutter in a dumpster outside the CVS where he worked. And then on April 7th of 2023, at 12:45 p.m., Allen said, quote, "Dear Lord, forgive me for essaying Abby, Libby, and Chris," end quote. This statement was entered into a log kept by a correctional officer named Michael Roberts. Allen later made the same confession, but added that he'd also essayed somebody named Kevin. So the questions are these confessions reliable? And who the F are Chris and Kevin? 3 days later, on April 10th at 7:55 p.m., Allen made another confession, that was logged by yet another correctional officer. Allen said, quote, "I unalived those 2 girls, so I have to unalive myself," end quote. He didn't use the word unalived, but I think you know what I mean. The YouTube popo don't like the word, red rum, red rum, red rum. Sorry, I just thought that sounded kind of scary, and I thought you might enjoy that. 2 weeks later, on April 29th of 2023, Allen told another correctional officer that he intended to essay Abby and Libby, but he got scared, so he unalived them instead. FYI, what Allen said there seems to match the evidence at trial. We heard that there was no tangible evidence of trauma or essay. There was also no DNA from Allen or from anybody else that was able to be tested anyway. Fast forward 2 months to June 18th, and Allen said once again that he unalived Abby and Libby. Later, after Allen was transferred to the Wabash Valley Correctional Facility, a corrections officer overheard Allen saying to himself that he was sorry for what he did, sorry for unaliving the girls. Now, Allen's defense team, as I said earlier, is saying that Allen made these confessions because Allen was in solitary confinement for 13 months and his mental health declined as a result of that. Several corrections officers from Westville Correctional Facility said that Allen was normal when he first arrived at the facility, but it was later that he started acting differently and he started displaying all those kind of gross behaviors that I described earlier. Over time, he began to refuse meals and his medication. He also supposedly hit his head on the cell door and the cell bars, causing some bruising to his face. But some of the officers said that they felt like he was feigning these things and kind of putting on a show. And once he had displayed the weird behaviors, he would go back to acting, quote, normal. Now, speaking of confessions, I read that a confession to a serious offense like this one is more likely than not to result in a conviction. And note that supposedly Allen's confessions were unsolicited, meaning no one at the time was trying to coerce a confession out of him. He wasn't being bullied in an interrogation room. And based on what we heard when he was being interrogated and he was being shouted at, he kept saying, "I didn't do it. I'm not going to admit to something I didn't do." So during the interrogations, the cops did try to coerce him into a confession, but he held firm and said, "No, I didn't do it." It was only once he was in jail and incarcerated that he, without solicitation, offered up these confessions, which in my mind makes them all the more powerful. According to the Innocence Project, overall about 31% of wrongful conviction cases included a false confession. For red rums, or unalivings, the number jumps to 63%. According to the Innocence Project, innocent people confess to crimes they didn't commit for one of 2 reasons. 1, police interrogation methods, and 2, mental state of the person in custody. So far, from the 2 interrogations of Richard Allen that we've heard about, Richard Allen did not confess to the crime, no matter how hard the interrogators tried to get him to. So number 1, police interrogation methods, I don't think that fits with this case. But number 2, mental health of the person in custody, that could be a factor. But again, Richard Allen knew some of the details about the crime that hadn't been released to the public. But what I think and what you think really doesn't matter, because it's going to be up to the jurors to decide if they believe those confessions that Richard Allen made. And what I still want to know is, who are Chris and Kevin? Until the next time on Bed Crime Stories, love you guys.